It was a quiet, ordinary day on Earth, but the skies were about to change forever. No one could have predicted what would happen next. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the world, a strange, bright light appeared in the sky. At first, people thought it was a comet or a shooting star, but the light grew larger and brighter, far too large to be anything natural. On the ground, people stopped what they were doing, eyes glued to the sky, trying to understand what they were seeing. Phones began to buzz with questions and confusion. Was it an aircraft, a missile, some kind of alien technology? The light became so intense that it seemed to fill the sky. Then, without any warning, a massive spaceship appeared. Its shape was unlike anything humans had ever seen, smooth, metallic, and gleaming in the sunlight. It hovered silently above the city, casting a long shadow over the people below. Panic spread through the streets. Some people screamed, others tried to run, but many were simply frozen in place, unable to comprehend what was happening. This was not just any spacecraft, it was something far more advanced than anything Earth had ever seen. The aliens had arrived. The ship slowly descended, landing in the middle of a vast open field on the outskirts of the city. The grass bent under its enormous weight, but the ship remained steady, as if it had been there for centuries. The doors of the ship opened with a soft hiss, and out stepped figures unlike any humans had ever seen. They were tall and elegant, their bodies covered in shimmering, silvery armor that seemed to glow under the setting sun. The aliens walked in perfect harmony, their movements graceful and deliberate. As they approached, their leader stepped forward. She had piercing blue eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light, and her long flowing hair seemed to move as if it had a life of its own. Her presence was calm but powerful, and the crowd fell silent in her presence. The leader raised her hand, signaling for everyone to be still. She spoke, her voice clear and precise, though it was in a language no one on Earth had ever heard before. But then, something remarkable happened. The words seemed to echo in everyone's minds, a form of telepathy that instantly translated her speech into English. "We come in peace," she said. "We have watched your planet for a long time. We offer you protection from a great threat that is coming your way." The words hung in the air. A threat. Protection. The crowd remained silent, unsure of how to react. The alien leader continued, her tone serious and urgent. "There are enemies in the galaxy who will destroy everything in their path. You are not yet prepared to defend yourselves. We offer you the technology, the knowledge, and the power to protect your world." A few gasps spread through the crowd, but most people remained skeptical. Some muttered amongst themselves, unsure of what to make of the situation. "Who are these people?" they whispered. "What do they want from us?" One of the human officials, a high-ranking government leader, stepped forward. His face was tight with skepticism, but he tried to remain calm. "How do we know you can be trusted?" he asked. The alien leader looked directly at him, her eyes unwavering. "We have no interest in deceiving you. We want to help you, but you must decide. We cannot force you to accept our offer, but you will not survive without our help." Another official stepped forward, this one with a grin on his face. "Thanks, but no thanks," he said, chuckling. "We've been fine on our own so far. What makes you think we need your protection?" The crowd, still uncertain, began to murmur. Some of them seemed to agree with the skeptic, while others remained quiet, unsure of what to think. The alien leader's eyes darkened, but she did not respond. She simply turned and motioned for her crew to follow her back into the ship. As the aliens boarded their ship and the massive doors closed, the crowd stood in stunned silence. Was it a joke? A prank? Could this really be happening? The sun had set by now, and the once bright skies were now dark with the weight of uncertainty. Some people were still staring up at the sky, hoping for an answer that never came. Meanwhile, others simply shrugged it off, dismissing the aliens as a hoax or a misunderstanding. The idea of galactic protection seemed too far-fetched for most. Earth had survived countless disasters before. Why should this be any different? Little did they know, the aliens' offer was not one they could afford to ignore. As the spaceship ascended back into the sky and disappeared into the night, the first seeds of doubt were planted. Soon, those who laughed at the aliens would realize how dangerous their dismissal had been, but for now, Earth's people returned to their lives, with no idea that the future of their world had just been sealed by their own ignorance. The next morning, Earth woke up to the same bright sky and bustling cities, but something felt different. The events of the previous day still lingered in the air like a heavy fog. People continued to talk about the strange visitors, some still mocking their offer of protection, others left uneasy and uncertain. No one had expected a real invasion, but the presence of the aliens was a reminder that the world was changing. The news channels were filled with speculation. The aliens had come, given their warning, and left, but they hadn't said when the threat would arrive or how to prepare for it. The questions were endless, but the answers were few. Governments around the world scrambled to figure out what to do. Some leaders called for an immediate meeting, others tried to play it down, claiming that the aliens were just another form of advanced technology they couldn't yet understand. In the heart of the city, a small group of scientists and military personnel gathered. They were not convinced by the aliens' peaceful message. They were skeptical. What kind of alien race would offer to help without asking for something in return? What did they want from Earth? It seemed too good to be true, and for them, that made it dangerous. You don't just offer protection without a price, said Dr. Harriet Sloan, a leading scientist in extraterrestrial biology. There has to be a catch. We need to be prepared for anything. General Markson, a tough, no-nonsense military leader, nodded grimly. I agree. We can't just accept their help blindly. If they're here to help, fine, but we need to know everything about them. Who are they really? What do they expect from us? We can't just trust them. They knew they couldn't let their guard down. The enemies the aliens had mentioned might be real, but they couldn't risk handing over control of the planet to an unknown species, no matter how advanced they were. Yet, as the day went on, there were signs that the rest of the world wasn't as cautious. In a meeting with the UN, many representatives dismissed the aliens' message as a form of high-level diplomacy. Why would anyone attack us? We've survived wars, natural disasters, and even climate change. We can handle whatever comes, one diplomat said, his voice thick with skepticism. His words echoed in the minds of many. Humanity had always believed it could solve its own problems. But now, standing at the crossroads of a potentially galactic-scale conflict, it became painfully clear that Earth was a small part of something far greater. The aliens knew it, but most humans were still too proud to admit it. Across the globe, some people continued to mock the aliens. On social media, hashtags like #EarthDoesn't need protection and #GoHomeAliens began to trend. Memes flooded the internet, poking fun at the aliens' appearance, their offer, and even their supposed threats. It seemed like everyone was ready to laugh it off, to move on, as if nothing had changed. But for others, especially those who had seen the sheer size and power of the alien ship, the doubt was real. That night, strange phenomena began to occur around the world. A small, isolated town in Alaska experienced an unusual electromagnetic storm. Power lines sparked and short-circuited, leaving the town in darkness. In the Pacific Ocean, an enormous wave appeared without warning, cresting higher than any tsunami previously recorded. While both events were isolated and mysterious, they served as a subtle reminder of the force that the aliens had warned about. Still, humanity continued to reject the idea that Earth needed outside help. People in power brushed off the possibility of extraterrestrial interference, claiming it was merely a coincidence, but the unease among the population began to grow. Some who had initially laughed now found themselves checking the sky nervously at night. What if the aliens were right? What if this was the beginning of something bigger? In the small town of Willow Creek, a group of farmers stood outside their homes, gazing up at the stars. One of them, Tom Hartley, had seen the alien ship the day before. I don't know what they were offering, he said, looking up, but there's something about the way they left. Something tells me they weren't joking. His words struck a chord with the others, and they found themselves thinking the same thing, but they were still divided. Some of them shrugged it off, saying it was just another chapter in the strange history of the universe. Others believed they were witnessing the first true encounter with beings from another world, and that humanity's response would define its future. The debate raged on across the planet. Some cities were filled with chaos and protests, demanding answers from the government. Others were quiet, as people tried to move on with their lives, hoping that the whole thing would be forgotten. Yet, deep down, everyone could feel it, the gnawing fear that something was coming, something that humanity wasn't ready for. In the depths of the government's secretive operations, preparations had already begun. Hidden within the sprawling underground facilities, scientists began working around the clock to study any remnants of the alien technology they could gather. The military started running simulations of possible attacks, and weapon systems that had long been dormant were brought back online. But no one knew what they were truly preparing for. The aliens had warned that a great enemy was coming, but who were they really? Were they as powerful as the aliens claimed? Could Earth stand a chance? The clock was ticking. The aliens had given their warning, and now humanity had to make a choice. Would they trust the extraterrestrial visitors, or continue to stand on their own, convinced that they could handle whatever was coming? The uncertainty weighed heavily on every nation, every leader, every person. They had laughed at the aliens, but soon, the consequences of that laughter would unfold in ways no one could predict. That as the days passed, the question lingered in the air like a dark cloud. From who? The answer, though still unknown, was drawing closer with each passing moment. The world continued to argue. Some laughed, others feared, but one thing was becoming clear: Earth was divided. What had once seemed like an unbelievable tale of aliens offering protection had now turned into a silent waiting game. The skies were silent. There was no sign of the aliens, no sign of any attack. But beneath the surface, something was changing. People weren't just looking to the skies anymore, they were beginning to look at each other in the halls of power. Governments tried to act as if everything was normal, behind closed doors. However, fear simmered. What if they had been wrong? What if the aliens weren't just offering help, they were warning them of something far worse than they could comprehend? The military intensified their operations, preparing for a threat they weren't sure would come, and scientists continued to study the alien technology they had recovered, hoping for some kind of breakthrough. But for most of the world, life went on. There was no immediate attack, and so people moved on. They returned to their jobs, their families, and their routines. The laughter faded, replaced by a quiet unease. In the back of their minds, something nagged at them. The aliens had offered them protection, but had humanity truly been able to see the danger that lay ahead? Weeks passed. People returned to their daily lives, but there was always a lingering question that no one could answer. Was the universe really as peaceful as they thought, or was the calm before a storm? Then, one morning, everything changed. It was subtle at first, just a flicker in the sky, a flash of light that caught the attention of a few early risers. They assumed it was just a meteor or an ordinary weather phenomenon, but then the lights became brighter, and before anyone could understand what was happening, the sky darkened. No storm clouds, no warning, just a sudden, unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow the world. The first sound came as a low rumble, like the earth itself was trembling. And then, a series of booming explosions echoed through the air. It wasn't an attack from above, it was something worse. The enemy that the aliens had warned about had arrived. It didn't take long for panic to spread. Cities went dark as the power grid failed, radio signals cut out, and the internet crashed. People took to the streets, shouting in confusion, trying to understand what was happening, but no one had answers. The military scrambled to respond, but it quickly became clear that they weren't prepared for the scale of the disaster. Across the globe, people looked to the skies, hoping for some sign of hope, some form of defense, but the aliens were nowhere to be seen. In the midst of the chaos, humanity was alone, completely alone. That's when the first signs of the enemy appeared. Massive ships, dark and foreboding, came out of the shadows. They were nothing like the sleek, elegant craft the aliens had used. These ships were monstrous, bristling with weapons, their designs cruel and menacing. The air hummed with the low buzz of their engines, and the ground trembled as they moved through the atmosphere. The enemy had arrived, and their presence sent waves of terror through the streets. People ran in all directions, seeking shelter. Some tried to call for help, but their phones were useless. The communications systems were jammed, and the world's leaders could only watch helplessly as the skies filled with the invaders' ships. It was then that the first explosions hit the ground. The ships unleashed their weapons, causing chaos on Earth. Buildings crumbled, streets cracked, and fires erupted in every direction. The sound of destruction filled the air, drowning out any remaining sense of hope. But then, just when it seemed like all was lost, the aliens returned. A single ship, glowing with the same silvery light as before, appeared in the sky. It moved with incredible speed, cutting through the air with a grace that the enemy ships couldn't match. As it descended, the aliens appeared once again, this time not as peaceful visitors, but as warriors ready for battle. The leader, the same alien woman who had offered Earth protection, stepped out onto the bridge of the ship. Her eyes burned with intensity, and her expression was one of unwavering determination. She addressed the people of Earth through a booming voice that echoed across the planet. "We are here to defend you, but you must help us," she said. "You have rejected our warning. Now you must prove that you are worth saving." Her words were met with silence. The enemy ships continued to hover above, their weapons aimed at Earth's cities. Yet for the first time, there was a sense of possibility. The aliens had returned not as invaders, but as protectors, though their protection came with a heavy price. Humanity had laughed. Humanity had rejected their help, and now, as the world crumbled around them, the very beings they had mocked were their only hope. But the aliens' offer came with a challenge. "Fight with us or perish alone," the leader said. "You may not have been ready to listen, but now you must decide. You cannot defeat them on your own." A wave of uncertainty swept over the population. The people who had mocked the aliens now found themselves with no choice but to trust them. The enemy's power was overwhelming, and the aliens were the only force capable of standing against them. But what would Earth's response be? Would they join the fight and stand alongside their alien protectors, or would they continue to resist, thinking they could fight this battle alone? The skies remained dark, the enemy ships looming like shadows. The fate of Earth now rested on a choice, one that humanity would have to make quickly, before it was too late. The world had changed in an instant. What had once been a peaceful planet, bustling with the ordinary rhythms of daily life, was now a battlefield. The streets were filled with chaos, the skies were darkened by the monstrous enemy ships, and every corner of the earth seemed to tremble under the weight of impending destruction. Yet there was a flicker of hope. The aliens, once laughed at and dismissed, had returned not as visitors offering peace, but as warriors ready to defend humanity. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Across the globe, people gathered in their homes, in underground bunkers or in the streets, watching the sky with dread. Governments that had previously dismissed the aliens now found themselves scrambling for control, unsure whether they could rally their people to fight. The military was overwhelmed by the strength of the enemy's advanced technology. The city of New York was in ruins, much like every other major city on Earth. Fires burned out of control, and the air was thick with smoke and despair. The alien ship that had descended to Earth stood as a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. It was still hovering above, but its light now seemed to offer more than just protection. It offered a chance to fight back, to take a stand, to prove that humanity had more than just arrogance, it had the will to survive. Yet there were still those who resisted. Even in the face of total destruction, some leaders and citizens refused to trust the aliens. The world was divided more than ever. Some factions argued that humanity could fight back without the help of the aliens, that they didn't need to rely on outsiders to protect them. "We built this world ourselves," they said. "We don't need to beg for help." But deep down, they all knew the truth. Without the aliens' advanced technology, humanity stood little chance against the enemy. The invaders had ships that could level entire cities with a single strike, weapons that could cut through Earth's defenses like a hot knife through butter. And the aliens, they had fought this enemy before. They had seen it destroy countless worlds, and they knew how to stand against it. Still, the question remained, could humanity truly trust these beings? Would the people who had once rejected them now bow down to their help? The answer came not from politicians or military leaders, but from the ordinary people, those who had witnessed the alien ships and seen the power of the enemy firsthand. In the chaos, alliances began to form. Citizens who had once mocked the aliens now found themselves standing side by side with them, ready to learn and fight together. The hope that had seemed so fragile in the beginning began to grow stronger. Dr. Harriet Sloan, the scientist who had been so skeptical in the early days, stood at the front lines, staring up at the alien ship. Her mind raced with the possibilities. She had once believed that humanity could solve its own problems, that Earth could stand alone against any threat. But now, watching the enemy wreak havoc across the globe, she realized the truth. Without the aliens' help, Earth was doomed. "We need to act," she said, turning to the others. "Now, we've wasted enough time." General Markson, whose stern face had once carried the weight of suspicion, now nodded. "You're right," he said. "We've been too slow, too divided. But it's time to join forces with them." The moment of decision had come. The aliens weren't just offering technology and knowledge, they were offering a chance to survive. The only question was whether humanity was ready to accept it. It wasn't just a matter of trust anymore. It was a matter of survival. Around the world, similar decisions were being made. In the ruins of London, people had come together in the streets, calling for unity. In Tokyo, citizens began to form alliances with the alien forces, ready to fight as one. Even in the fractured regions of Africa, where resources were scarce, people rallied under the banner of survival, eager to prove that humanity was more than just a species full of pride, was a species full of potential. The air was electric with fear and hope in equal measure. People, once divided by politics and pride, now stood together in the face of the greatest threat humanity had ever known. But time was running out. The enemy was advancing faster than anyone had anticipated, and the alien ship, their only beacon of hope, was starting to show signs of strain. "You have to work with us," the alien leader's voice boomed across the battlefield. "We cannot hold off the enemy much longer. The longer you wait, the more destruction will follow. You must unite, or all will be lost." Her voice echoed through every city, every corner of the world. The aliens had already shown their strength, but it was clear that they couldn't fight this battle alone. The fate of humanity now lay in the hands of those who had laughed, those who had doubted, and those who had rejected the offer of protection. Would they stand together, or would they continue to fight among themselves? In the moments that followed, something extraordinary happened. The world began to shift. The government leaders who had once mocked the alien presence now stepped forward to form a coalition with the extraterrestrial forces. The military, once divided over whether to trust the aliens, now stood shoulder to shoulder with them, ready to face the enemy. Across the globe, Earth's people began to mobilize. The citizens who had doubted the aliens now found themselves working with them, building weapons, preparing defenses, and rallying others to fight. It wasn't just a war against an alien invader, it was a war for the future of humanity itself. The enemies in the sky continued their assault, their ships bearing down on Earth like a swarm of locusts. But now, humanity wasn't alone. The aliens had given them a chance to fight, to survive, and perhaps even to win. And in the heart of the battlefield, as the first battle began to rage, there was a single, undeniable truth. The time for laughter had passed. It was time to fight. The first battle was unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. The enemy ships, colossal and imposing, had descended upon Earth with terrifying precision. Their weapons were like nothing seen before: energy beams that sliced through buildings, firestorms that reduced cities to ash in seconds. It felt like the end of the world, and for a moment it seemed as if Earth had no chance. But humanity had one advantage that the invaders didn't expect: determination. The decision had been made. The world had come together in a way that no one had believed possible. Governments, civilians, and the alien protectors fought side by side, united under a single banner. The air was thick with tension, but in the midst of it all, there was a strange sense of purpose. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about defiance. It was about showing the universe that Earth would not be a helpless victim. The enemy thought they could come, destroy only, but they hadn't counted on humanity's refusal to back down. The first strike came from the alien ships, their sleek forms gliding through the sky with deadly precision. They fired at the enemy's lead ship, their weapons illuminating the night. The enemy retaliated with a barrage of energy blasts that shook the Earth to its core. The ground trembled, and buildings cracked, but humanity stood firm. The moment had come, and there was no turning back. In the midst of the chaos, General Markson gave the order: "All units engage. We fight together, or we die alone. Move out." The military units, now armed with advanced alien weapons, stormed the battlefield, coordinating with the alien forces in perfect harmony. The air was filled with the sounds of weapons firing, explosions echoing through the streets, and the distant hum of the alien ships cutting through the atmosphere. But despite the overwhelming odds, humanity fought with everything it had. Dr. Harriet Sloan, once the skeptic, now stood at the heart of the battle. She had seen the alien technology firsthand, and it had been nothing short of revolutionary. The weapons, the shields, the systems, they were beyond anything Earth could have developed on its own. But it wasn't just the technology that had made the difference, it was the unity. People who had once been divided by borders, ideologies, and fears now worked as one. They understood that this wasn't just about defeating an enemy, it was about proving that humanity could rise above its flaws, its pride, and its fear. That's the battle raged on. The enemy began to realize that Earth was not the helpless planet they had thought it was. The invaders, who had once seemed invincible, now found themselves pushed back. The alien ships, with their superior technology, made short work of the enemy's heavy artillery. But it wasn't just the aliens who had turned the tide. It was the people of Earth, the military, the civilians, the scientists, the children all had a role to play. In the ruins of what had once been New York City, a group of civilians armed with alien-made rifles manned the barricades, fending off wave after wave of enemy soldiers. The air was thick with smoke, and the smell of burning metal filled the streets, but the group held their ground. One by one they took down the enemy, working together with a focus and determination that was unmatched. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, the alien leader, who had once offered peace, now led the charge against the invaders. Her eyes were filled with fire, and her voice rang out as she commanded the aliens and humans alike. "This is our home now," she said. "We will not let it fall." The ground shook with each passing explosion, but the tide of the battle was turning. The enemy, once so confident, was starting to retreat, their ships, damaged and overwhelmed by the combined might of Earth's people and the aliens, began to break apart in midair. For the first time, it seemed as though victory was within reach. But the war wasn't over, not yet. Just as it seemed that the invaders were on the verge of retreating, a massive energy blast erupted from the enemy's flagship. It was unlike anything Earth had ever seen, an immense wave of destructive power that ripped through the atmosphere, creating a shockwave that could be felt across the planet. The blast hit the alien ships, sending them spiraling into the ground, their once formidable force now reduced to burning wreckage. For a moment, it seemed as though all hope was lost. The aliens, who had stood as Earth's protectors, were now on the brink of defeat themselves. The invaders had one final weapon, a doomsday device capable of destroying everything in its path. The alien leader, her eyes narrowed in determination, knew that this was their last stand. But humanity was not done yet. There was still one final chance. In a desperate move, Dr. Sloan and a small group of scientists worked with the alien forces to devise a plan. They had to infiltrate the enemy's flagship and destroy the weapon before it could be activated. The mission was risky. No one knew if they would survive, but it was the only hope left. With the alien leader's guidance, a team of soldiers, scientists, and engineers made their way to the enemy flagship. Navigating through the wreckage of the battlefield, they fought their way through the ship, taking down enemy forces as they went. The stakes had never been higher. The fate of the planet rested in their hands. Finally, they reached the core of the enemy's weapon, a massive, pulsating sphere of energy that hummed with a menacing power. Dr. Sloan, heart-pounding, approached the control panel, knowing that any mistake could trigger the device and end everything. With trembling hands, she worked to disarm the weapon, her mind racing through calculations and equations. The alien soldiers held the line, fighting off the remaining invaders as the seconds ticked away. And then, just as the countdown reached its final seconds, Dr. Sloan pressed the final key. The weapon's energy field flickered and died, and the device powered down. The enemy's last weapon was neutralized. The battle was won, but it came at a cost. The world had been forever changed. The aliens, who had once been seen as mere visitors, had become Earth's saviors. The humans who had once laughed at them now stood in awe. Humanity had learned an important lesson that day, that pride and fear were the true enemies, not the alien forces who had tried to help them. But there was no time for celebration. Earth had won the battle, but the scars left by the war would remain forever. The question now was, what kind of future would humanity choose? The dust had barely settled, but the world had already begun to shift. Earth had survived the invasion, but it was not unscathed. The once thriving cities were now nothing more than ruins. The streets, where life had once flowed freely, were now filled with the wreckage of war. The sky, once clear, now bore the scars of battle. Plumes of smoke rising from the remnants of the alien ships that had fallen to Earth's surface. And yet, amidst all the destruction, there was a flicker of something stronger than fear, hope. The victory had been hard won, but it had been enough. Humanity had stood its ground. With the alien forces by their side, they had proven that they could fight back, that they were not weak and vulnerable. But the question remained, could they rebuild, or had the scars of war torn something deeper within their souls? In the aftermath of the battle, the alien leader stood before the ruins of what had once been a thriving metropolis. Her eyes, once filled with a calm and collected wisdom, now held a sorrow that reflected the damage done not only to Earth, but to everything she had hoped for. The alien forces, though victorious, had lost many of their own in the fight. They had fought for Earth, but the cost had been great. And yet, the alien leader had a single mission now, to guide humanity forward. There was no turning back from what had happened. The enemy had been defeated, but the war was far from over. The real challenge would be rebuilding a world that had been shattered, both physically and emotionally. "You've done well," the alien leader spoke softly to General Markson, who had become her trusted ally in the aftermath of the battle. "But the war doesn't end with the victory of this battle. It ends with how you rebuild." Markson, looking out over the devastated landscape, nodded grimly. "We can rebuild the cities, but what about the hearts of the people? What about their minds? The world's never going to be the same after this." The alien leader looked at him, her eyes steady. The world will never be the same, but that does not mean it cannot be better. You fought for survival. Now fight for the future. Markson felt a sense of resolve flood through him. He understood the weight of her words. The battle had been won, but that was only the beginning. The world needed healing, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Humanity would need to face its fears, learn to trust again, and ultimately, learn from the mistakes they had made before. Across the globe, Earth's leaders had gathered. The governments of every nation had come together to decide what the future would look like. The destruction had been too great to ignore. The rebuilding process would not only require the labor of Earth's people, but also the cooperation of the aliens who had fought beside them. Together, they could achieve what none of them could do alone. The meetings were tense, old rivalries and divisions resurfaced, and it quickly became clear that the task of rebuilding was not going to be easy. Nations were torn between accepting alien aid and rejecting the idea of foreign influence in their newly ravaged lands. The temptation to push away their saviors was strong, but so was the knowledge that without their help, Earth's recovery would be slow and painful. Dr. Harriet Sloane, who had once doubted the aliens' motives, now found herself at the forefront of these discussions. She stood beside the alien leader, the woman who had helped save Earth, yet was still viewed with suspicion by many. They were both an odd pairing, one human, one alien, but they shared the same goal: to guide humanity through this rebuilding process. We cannot afford to be divided, Dr. Sloane said, her voice clear and authoritative. We have seen what happens when we try to stand alone. The enemy will always find a way to tear us apart. But together we can rebuild not just the cities, but our trust, our hope. We must move forward, or we risk losing everything we fought for. The alien leader spoke then, her words measured but firm. The enemy was not the only threat you faced. Humans, your pride, your division, and your refusal to accept help have been your greatest weaknesses. This is your chance to change, your chance to prove that you are capable of more than destruction. Work with us, not as conquerors, but as equals. Only then will you truly understand what it means to be strong. There was silence in the room. Earth's leaders, who had been ready to fight for control, now found themselves at a crossroads. What kind of future would they choose? The decision wasn't just about rebuilding cities or repairing roads. It was about rebuilding the very fabric of humanity itself. Would they choose division and distrust, or would they choose unity and collaboration? The hours passed, and slowly the discussions began to take shape. Agreements were made, not just about infrastructure and defense, but about education, governance, and shared knowledge. The aliens would help guide humanity, not as overlords, but as partners, showing them the ways of the universe, helping them understand the technologies that could change the world. The road ahead was long, and the scars of war would remain for generations, but humanity had been given a second chance, a chance to do things differently. In the months that followed, Earth began to heal. The cities were rebuilt, but they were not the same as before. They were stronger, safer, and more advanced. The alien technology that had once seemed so foreign now became integrated into daily life. People learned to live alongside their alien allies, not as subordinates, but as equals. They learned from the mistakes of their past and began to build a future where cooperation and unity were the foundation. That the alien leader stood once again in the heart of the city, looking out over the horizon. The world was still broken, still scarred, but it was also something more. It was full of potential. Earth had faced its darkest hour, and in doing so had found its brightest light. It had fought, it had struggled, and it had survived, and now it would thrive. Humanity has proven its strength, the alien leader said quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. But the real test has just begun. The galaxy is vast, and there are challenges ahead that you cannot yet see. But if you continue to stand together, there is no limit to what you can achieve. And with that, Earth began its journey toward a future where anything was possible. The world had begun to change, not just in the physical sense, but in the hearts and minds of those who lived on it. The rubble of battle had been cleared, and new structures began to rise where old ones had crumbled. But it wasn't just the cities that were being rebuilt. Humanity itself was undergoing a transformation. The scars of the war, though still fresh, were beginning to fade, and with them, the old divisions that had once torn Earth apart. Yet, for all the progress made, there remained a lingering uncertainty in the air. The aliens, who had once been seen as mere visitors, now walked alongside humans as partners. The very concept of cooperation, something that had been unimaginable before the invasion, had now become Earth's greatest strength. The world was healing, but the question remained, would humanity be able to maintain this fragile peace? Or would the old fears and prejudices rise again? In the streets of New York, once reduced to rubble, the skyline was once again alive with towering buildings and neon lights. The bustling crowds moved through the streets, unaware of the silent observers watching from above. The alien ships, once symbols of fear, now hovered like silent guardians, their sleek forms casting long shadows across the city. The aliens were no longer just protectors. They were teachers, guides, and friends. Dr. Harriet Sloan, standing on the balcony of the newly rebuilt headquarters of the Earthlian Coalition, watched the city below with a sense of cautious optimism. The world had changed so much in so little time, and yet there was still so much to be done. She had witnessed the horrors of the invasion firsthand, but she had also witnessed the strength of humanity's spirit. Now, as part of the effort to rebuild, she was tasked with something equally as important, ensuring that the lessons learned from the war were passed on to future generations. Beside her stood the alien leader who had once offered Earth protection but now shared the responsibility of guiding humanity's future. Her eyes, still as piercing as ever, reflected the same sense of hope and doubt that Harriet felt. "We've come so far," Dr. Sloan said, her voice tinged with a mixture of pride and concern. "But how do we ensure that we don't fall into the same traps again? How do we make sure that the unity we've found now doesn't dissolve the moment we face our next challenge?" The alien leader turned to her, a slight, knowing smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It is not the challenge that defines you, Dr. Sloan. It is the choices you make in the face of it. The true strength of humanity lies in your ability to learn, to evolve, and to rise above your past mistakes. The universe is vast, and there will be other challenges ahead, but you have already shown that you are capable of facing them together." Harriet nodded, though the weight of the words lingered in the air. The alien leader's wisdom was undeniable, but the reality was more complicated. Humans were unpredictable, their history littered with examples of pride and division. Would they truly be able to overcome these ingrained flaws, or would they fall into old habits when the next threat arose? Meanwhile, the rest of the world moved forward. Nations that had once fought against each other now worked together, guided by the knowledge and resources shared by the aliens. The rebuilding was a massive effort, requiring every nation, every community, to set aside their differences for the greater good. The alien technology, once feared and misunderstood, had become an integral part of the rebuilding process. It was used not only to repair the damage done by the war, but also to accelerate Earth's progress in fields like energy, healthcare, and space exploration. In every classroom, children were taught not only about Earth's history, but also about the galaxy beyond. They learned about the vastness of the universe, the civilizations that inhabited it, and the importance of cooperation between species. The future they were being prepared for was one where humanity was no longer isolated, where the rest of the universe was not just a mystery to be feared, but a realm to be explored and understood. However, despite the advances and the bright future ahead, the past could not be so easily erased. As Earth's people looked toward the stars, there were still those who couldn't let go of the old fears. The scars of the war were still fresh, and while many had embraced the new reality, there were factions within society that resisted the change. Some saw the aliens as conquerors, others as threats, while still others refused to believe that Earth needed their help in the first place. The debates were fierce, and sometimes violent, but they were a necessary part of the healing process. For humanity to truly move forward, it would need to confront the darkest parts of itself, the fears, the prejudices, and the divisions that had nearly torn the world apart. It was in this context that a new generation of leaders began to emerge, who had grown up in the aftermath of the war, who had seen the consequences of division and the power of unity. They were the children who had been taught to look beyond their planet, to understand the universe as a vast, interconnected web of life. They had seen the worst of humanity, but they also had the opportunity to shape its future. One such leader, a young woman named Amelia, stood in front of the United Nations, addressing a world that was still healing from the wounds of the war. Her words were measured but filled with passion. "We have been given a second chance," she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. "We have seen what happens when we allow fear and division to guide us, but we have also seen the power of unity, of cooperation, of working together toward a common goal. The universe is not ours to conquer, it is ours to understand, and if we are to survive, we must work with others, not just as a species, but as citizens of a much larger world." Her speech resonated deeply with the audience, and for the first time, there was a sense of collective resolve. The road ahead was long, and the challenges were many, but humanity had already taken the first steps. It had learned the hard way that it was not alone in the universe, that it was part of something much bigger. As the speech ended, the alien leader, standing at the back of the room, allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. She had come to Earth with one goal in mind, to protect, but in doing so she had given humanity a gift far greater than survival. She had shown them that they were capable of so much more than they had ever imagined, that the future, the uncertain, could be shaped by the choices they made today. Earth had survived, but now, it was ready to thrive. Together with their alien allies, humanity would take its place in the galaxy, not as a solitary species, but as a partner among many. And as the stars shone brightly above, they knew that the true journey was just beginning.